your business going?
Going. Always can be better.
Always could be better?
Hello, and thank you so much for being here with me today. I am Arlena Trevina Jones, and you are watching the Intervene Show. I would like to give a special thanks to my director who stepped in for me today, Mr. Ernest Spencer, and shout outs to Bill, who's taking today off, as well as Leon. And so, Lee, you are in my prayers, and I hope to see you again soon, and that you'll be back in the studio with us. And Bill, enjoy your time away. But nevertheless, I have a very special guest. She's been here with us last year, and we've started building a really good bond and a relationship, and she's just a phenomenal lady. I'm going to actually let her introduce her titles and all the many things that she does here in the community. So thank you, Miss Ashley, for being here with me today.
Absolutely, sure. So I'm Ashley Carter Youngblood. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and marriage and family therapist in the Kalamazoo area. Just recently opened my own practice.
Okay, talk about that.
Yeah, so I have a passion for having a holistic approach to therapy, and that's something that I'm really passionate about. And you know, the more that I practiced in the field, the more that I really felt like that was my calling, to make sure not only in the interactions that I'm having with clients, but actually in the space that I'm creating, even a holistic space, even in the environment that I create. So the name of my business is Inner Peace Counseling, and that incorporates that holistic focus that I have.
When I think about counseling, I can't really envision what holistic looks like. So can we talk about
Sure.
what that looks like?
Absolutely, yeah, that's a great question, because a lot of people define it differently, and sometimes people even spell it differently, sometimes just with an H, sometimes with a W.
Okay.
So even holistic practitioners, I even had another holistic therapist in the area ask me, well, how do you spell it? And I said, well, just an H with no W.
Okay.
But holistic for me means two things. Holistic means looking at the entire person as a whole with a W. So what does your wellness look like mentally? What does your wellness look like physically? What about financially, sexually, spiritually, environmentally, socially, politically perhaps, and all of those things that help contribute to our well-being, where it's not just about your mental health or it's not just about your physical health. So that's one component of it. The other component that I incorporate is also the holistic approach of what does it mean to live as naturally as possible.
Okay.
So whether that's organic food, or whether that's healthy exercise for your body, doing natural things to facilitate sleep, as opposed to focusing on something like medication. Not that prescription medications aren't necessary sometimes, but I have a lot of people coming to me and saying, you know, I don't want to take medication. I want to learn how to best naturally manage whatever's going on in my life, whether physical symptoms or mental health symptoms, in order to be, you know, fully well in a holistic standpoint.
How much does a person's diet have to do with their mental health?
Oh, wow. So one of the things that I specialize in is treating women who deal with anxiety.
Okay.
Or worrying women. And when someone comes into my office for the first time, I ask a lot of questions about who they are, how to get to best know them, and I ask a variety of things, whether, you know, if you've had treatment for mental health before, are you seeing a primary care physician? One of the questions I also ask is, what does your nutrition look like?
Okay.
And how much coffee do you drink? How much caffeine do you drink? How much sugar do you drink? Because especially for anxiety disorders or people who tend to worry, I find that things like sugar and caffeine are a huge, huge contributor of the symptoms. And oftentimes if we talk about, well, you know, could you cut back a little bit, or could you fully eliminate that over time, because we're kind of a sugar addicted society anyway, same with caffeine. So they will describe that, oh my gosh, I feel so much better, I didn't realize that the sugar and caffeine really spiked me. And then of course what comes after a spike? The crash.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so sometimes that even contributes to symptoms of anxiety, I found. I've even had a couple, actually more than a couple, myself included, where, you know, I typically don't drink a lot of caffeine. I try to not just be the teacher of how to live holistically, but also to be the model of how to do that.
Okay.
So I try to live as holistically as possible, and I avoid caffeine because it makes me vibrate off the earth partly, but just because I want to be as holistic as possible. And when I and several people who I know who have tried to not consume as much sugar or caffeine didn't drink that for a long period of time, and they had a cup of coffee, they had panic attacks for at least like one continual 24-hour period. So I've heard multiple stories of how even things like that really affect people's mental health in a way that we wouldn't really think about.
Because I always, heard with children, especially, when they,
Sure.
that you're like, don't give your children candy, it gives them sugar rushes and different things like that. So you're saying that it kind of has the same effect in adults, but maybe just in a different form.
Sure, there's even evidence, and I can't remember which one it is, but there's some red dye number, like red dye 46 or 27, that actually they found contributes to symptoms of ADD or ADHD in kids. And so I don't specialize in working with children, so I can't remember all that information on the top of my head, but it's a pretty well-known fact that it actually triggers like this hyperactiveness in kids. So absolutely, I mean, we also are what we eat.
Okay.
I think of that, I think it was Hippocrates that said, the doctors of the future will give no medicine, but will teach patients in the art of like health and nutrition. And so, we produce what comes out, what happens is also what we put inside our bodies as well.
So how are people able to achieve those things? Because we kind of have the grocery stores, and so like making those choices, one versus the other, like what would that look like for someone?
Something healthy versus not healthy? Well, one thing that I think is important for us to understand also as a society in the context of, we're all about convenience, we're all about doing things quickly, we're all about whatever feels good, whatever is instant gratification, that you may want to buy, I don't know, do they even make Twinkies anymore? I don't know. I thought they discontinued.
And they have like some new ones that are like
they're amazing.
They are amazing.
Okay,
There's a couple of them that I'm like, thank you, Twinkie people. Don't do it every day because I know that's not holistic, but there's a couple of Twinkies out there that are pretty good.
And that doesn't mean that, you can't have those cheap moments of those things that you really enjoy and can consume. But instead of, going to the grocery store and getting a box of Twinkies, what's the emotional experience that wants to have some sort of food that comforts you? So it's also about creating a different relationship for yourself with food that's not necessarily about instant gratification or ease. If you want to live well and eat well and be well, it takes effort. It's not like we can just wave a magic wand and all of a sudden you feel better and your nutrition is wonderful. So, it's a journey, and each of those moments is really important and tends to build up to, what does our body look like? Just like if you ate 5 donuts a day every day, you may not have diabetes immediately, but it certainly isn't going to help you in the long term.
Right. I think that I was looking at life sometimes, and we are a lot about self-gratification right now.
Absolutely.
And I remember going through a fast, and I just fasted not eating meat. That was just kind of my moment of fasting. And my family was like, my daughter especially, she's a child, and she was like, Mom, I'll be so glad when you can eat meat again, because you don't cook very good when you can't taste it. Because I can't eat it because it's not meat. Because it's meat. And I was also explaining to her, sometimes we have to deny ourselves. And I don't think that, and I think in my fast, it really just made me have to stick to, sometimes we have to deny ourselves. Some things that may be a pleasure or be a moment of, I want to do this right now, but can I deny myself? And sometimes it made me, personally, at least mentally, I felt like I'm a stronger person because I know that I didn't have to just do it just because it was there or was available. It made me have to work a little bit harder to still feel fulfilled within my meals and stuff outside of my comfort zone, because I knew if I really wanted to, I had the food available.
Sure.
But it was a personal, spiritual thing that I was trying to deny myself, to teach myself that, Arlene, if I can deny myself in this area, it gives me the strength to make better choices and decisions along my life when times get tough, to remember I had the willpower to be able to deny it here, or this gives me the strength to be more aggressive or more active in other areas of my life.
Yeah, and I think when we are insightful in that way, and when we practice kind of experimenting with what our tolerances are, whether it's not eating meat or not consuming sugar or exercising 3 times a week or whatever, that we also learn a lot about ourselves. We learn, what our emotional experience is and what's the inner dialogue that we have about ourselves. What is it about the meat that comforts us? And what is it that reminds us that we're stronger than what we consume on a daily basis? So I think that's also an important part of it too, that whenever we're thinking about things, hopefully we can have enough self-reflection to recognize what's the emotional experience behind that wellness, even if it's food, for example.
And I think that food is probably a really big part of people, because
Oh, sure.
because our health is so affected. One of the things, and I'll say this little tidbit because your mother was a guest on my show.
Okay.
And so what I told her, one of the things that I told myself and my family that I would start to do more is go to the farmers markets.
Oh, sure.
And be more proactive about, one, supporting our farmers market and knowing that there's not all the chemicals and all the ingredients in the process of the food that you get if you go to the farmer's market. Same with the butcher shops. I said, I was going to make a change, actually make a little bit more further drive, a little bit more work, a little bit more effort, but it supports not only the farmers, but also, that this cow probably had not had any growth hormones if you choose to eat beef, or chicken or whatever meat you decide to consume if you are not a vegan or a vegetarian.
Right.
So I was like, this was a choice that I was deciding to make with myself and my family because I wanted to see and live a better life. Like in my industry, we see that there tends to be a lot of people with diabetes, and there tends to be a lot of people with cancers, and there tends to be a lot of people who have strokes. And like you said, it comes from the lifestyle and their eating, and then they become older, and then they're not able to live their very best life.
Right.
And then I also see people who are older, who ate naturally, who are strong and healthy and vibrant. Like I thank God for like my grandmother and my grandparents, and I know they ate real meat, they ate real vegetables, and they didn't have to grow up with the process of food. So you can kind of see that there's, in the younger generation, us kind of with a lot of the process, we know that it's there compared to some of our greater ancestors and elders, that their strength and their health is still very good because they didn't have the years of process like our generation.
Oh, totally. I mean, back then you ate pork and it was pork, or you went and got, chicken and it wasn't like the chicken McNuggets goo that they squeeze out that's like pink, they're and I'm sure there's some research out there. I know I've heard some, but the nutritional value of things is just so different. Even when you think about GMOs, like genetically modified, it's totally different. And that's why it's so important to not just eat something because it has organic on it, or eat something because of some reason that people are doing this and so it sounds good better than something else. I mean, it's also about doing that research and knowing what works really well for your body too. So that's another thing that another component of the holistic approach that I have is it's also about teaching us how can we listen to learn to ourselves. Because what you need to do to be holistic and live your best life is going to be totally different than what I need to do, which is going to be totally different than what someone else needs to do. And that's okay. It's just about being able to practice listening to ourselves and our bodies to find that level of wellness.
And how are there some things that people can practice to be able to do those things?
To listen to themselves? Yeah, that's a skill that really is just about practice. I find that people are more insightful than they give themselves credit for.
Okay.
And I largely, in my role as a therapist, I often will tell people, I see myself as the mirror. So I'm the one who's holding the mirror up and, like, that's what you just said, or here's where you want to go, but here's what you're doing. How does that relate? Is that really what you want to see? And so, I think oftentimes I'll even ask questions that make people think like, oh, well, I guess I did know that. And it helps them to realize that they do know more than they think they know. And I think that's one thing that I would remind people is, if you get that weird feeling in the pit of your stomach, or if you just don't feel quite right, listen to that. Your body and that inner wisdom. And some people see that spiritually, some people see that physiologically. There's some wisdom there. It's what makes our heart continue to pump and our eyes blink and our hair grow, and it'll always be there. We can always rely on it, but it's also about listening to that voice.
I think sometimes there is a lot of noises in life.
Yes.
A lot of times there's always so many stimulations noise-wise. And I even, I'll just use my daughter, for example. She'll want to have the radio on. I'm like, at night, honey, no radio. You kind of need to be in this peace and quiet.
Sure.
This calm, this moment of just you, yourself, and your thoughts, without so many frequencies, without somebody else putting all of these thoughts into your mind, so that you can just find yourself. I mean, right now she's small, so I don't see that it makes a huge difference at this time, but I want her to get into a practice of, sweetheart, sometimes you don't always have to have headphones on, you don't always have to have music, you don't always have to have that going to you. Sometimes just be quiet, at peace with yourself. You might not like what your thoughts are, what you're hearing, but maybe you need to process that and be in that moment. And it is just uncomfortable sometimes, but sometimes you just kind of need to be in that place.
Yeah, I even tell people too, be mindful of when you go somewhere and you're waiting in line, or when you go somewhere and you're sitting in a lobby, or when you're at a light. I mean, what do you see now when you go anywhere? People whipping out their phones, they're texting. I mean, very rarely are you seeing someone just sitting and just being present. And you're right, sometimes that can be uncomfortable, but we live in this fast-paced world where, all these expectations about if you're not posting 5 billion things on Facebook a day, like you're being a slacker. When, sometimes we can get so caught up in that like social media or our expectations as a parent or the times that we're spending with friends can really overcome us just being. And what you described, I mean, even with what you're talking to your daughter, is something that I would call mindfulness. So it's about practicing being present in that moment, but typically mindfulness is also going to include listening to yourself, because mindfulness is about checking in and being present and accepting whatever is there, even if it is uncomfortable, and sometimes it is.
I think even in that case is that you kind of find your moral compass.
Sure.
I think that, we have started, everything is just so okay, everything's okay, all right, fine, it feels good, do it. But what happened to our moral compass? Is it moral to be able to sit down with your friends and you're completely engaged in your phone? That's not, you're kind of losing that. I even find it, and I hope I'm not offending anybody, not that I go to church a lot, but I've even found that, I see children and they're in church and they're playing games and video games in church, and I'm like, that's kind of defeats the purpose of why you're in church. Like you're supposed
anywhere, dinner, doctor's office, driving down the road. I mean, I could not imagine raising kids in this day and age, because I mean, you're in front of a screen the moment that you come out of the womb, it seems like. And there's research that says exposure to a screen prior to 2 years actually causes significant decreases in development for children. Okay. So I think we'll really begin to see the effects of that. I mean, when I went to school, we were lucky to have a computer. And nowadays, all the kids are having their homework on computers, and they're having to email their teachers, and they're having to submit things online and do their assignments in class on the computers. I mean, when we unplug from our true selves in that way and we plug into electronic, I think you're right, sometimes we can lose ourselves in the process.
And as you said, I think it kind of goes back to, and maybe why there is a lot of mental health issues or a lot of stresses and a lot of anxieties, because those are things that also that where people are feeding into, because you're always trying to compete, compare, live up to these expectations, because you're always obsessed with watching this. I mean, like I said, I can always bring my child up because it's easy with her, because she'll watch the Disney Channel and feel like this is what reality is. And often as parents, we try to tell them, no, that's not necessarily what reality is. I need you to be in the moment here and, smell the roses, touch things, be present in this, and not always put your standard to this is what you see on television, so this is what you should strive to be for yourself. And so I think that does cause maybe some extra anxieties, stresses on young people, cyberbullying, like all of these things are now present, where if you weren't even connected to it, for a minute I lost connection to my phone. I remember I was and so for like a month or like almost 2 months, I didn't have.
What do you do with yourself?
I know, like I had to learn how to do everything, and I found that, I don't have to really look on Facebook as often. I did not get on my social media, like I just, by losing it, I was like, I'm still okay. Like there were some inconveniences there, but at the end of the day, like I was still okay. So maybe it's okay sometimes to even fast from that and like give ourselves some time to say.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm actually in the process of writing an article about that, the curse of availability, because we are so available nowadays, and to be able to fast from that, or to be able to, like after a certain time, it's quiet hours, we don't use technology, and sometimes that can even contribute to sleep issues, the blue light emitted from screens. I hear that a lot in my office, that I just can't sleep very well. Well, what are you doing? Well, I'm like looking on Instagram, or I'm pinning things on Pinterest, or I'm like watching funny videos. It helps me relax. Well, that's great, that you know what to do for your own self-care, but what is that doing for your brain? I mean, that's activating a part of the brain that prevents us from falling asleep. So it's also about thinking how that contributes to our daily life and incorporating that in a way that is healthy and not something that's completely all-encompassing. And I think, part of also what I remind people is that technology or social media, it was designed for us. So the good news is that it is stressful sometimes, but you can also make it what you want to make it. So I'll encourage people, maybe don't even follow anyone on Facebook. Maybe only follow positive groups that gives you little pick-me-ups on the day, or funny videos, or fluffy bunnies running around and playing with dogs. I mean, whatever you need to do, you have the ability to make that blank slate whatever you want. But it's about those choices time and time again and how that contributes to someone's wellness.
So let's continue on you and your practice and kind of what makes you stand out, what makes you different, because we got the health, we got the wellness.
Yeah, so I specialize in counseling worrying women and struggling couples.
Okay.
So mindfulness in general, which I referenced a little bit ago, which really is kind of the holistic piece of that. That's something that I specialize in. It's what I love. I am convinced that we cannot effectively treat mental health symptoms without teaching mindfulness. If people don't know how to sit with emotions or experiences that are uncomfortable, we will constantly distract and we will constantly escape. So mindfulness is also this ability to empower yourselves to deal with what's going on in the moment, even if it's uncomfortable. So that's something that I really, really focus on with people. And the couples therapy work, I'm level 2 trained in Gottman couples therapy. Not a lot of people have experience with Gottman couples therapy. Some people have heard about it. The Gottmans have been doing research since the 1970s on couples, literally in what they call the love lab. So they'll strap them up to heart rate monitors and test their pulse and perspiration and pupil dilation, so we can know a lot from evidence just about how effective relationships can be had, what effective communication means, and how to do that. So that's something that I really love doing, is working with couples. The same for working with women too, and anxiety. I have a lot of different certifications as well. So I'm a certified alcohol and drug counselor. I am a certified acupuncture and detoxification specialist. I have that experience with couples work in Gottman training, the holistic piece. I have experience in trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. So I'm kind of like a mixed bag of things, I have a lot of different experiences, and usually people find that if they come to see me, most often I can treat whatever's going on with them, where sometimes it's preferable to refer out. But I also have a pretty substantial network of other therapists too, where if I'm not the right fit, I offer a warm transfer to someone else so they don't have to, go through the whole search process again.
So when someone is thinking about a therapist or thinking about a life coach or thinking about, maybe I should see someone, or what are some questions that they can kind of ask themselves, say, maybe I should or maybe I should not?
Ready for therapy or the fit with a therapist?
Oh, let's talk about ready for therapy and then fit with a therapist.
Yeah, so if you're considering that you're ready for therapy, you probably are.
Okay.
I always tell people, there's no shame in coming to therapy, even though unfortunately we still have this stigma about seeking help. I think sometimes even with physical health issues, there's this stigma. But
especially mental.
Especially, yeah, you're right. Especially mental. There's something different about mental health that people get a little squirmy about it.
Yeah.
But I always tell people, we need support every once in a while. That's nothing to be ashamed of.
Okay.
And I see people with a variety of issues. So someone can come short term, they just lost their partner and they don't know what to do with themselves, or they've been depressed for their entire life, or they're feeling really anxious, or they found out that their partner cheated on them and they are in crisis mode and they don't know what to do.
Okay.
So there's a wide variety of why people go to therapy, but it shouldn't be embarrassment. In fact, I would argue that if someone initiates going to therapy or saying that they need help, that's actually a really brave step forward, because it's not only brave to get the help, but it's also brave to say, you know what, I do need some help.
Okay.
So, if you're ready, you probably know it. But if things don't just feel right, if you feel like you're caught up in these same patterns, or a lot of the times when people come to me, they use the word stuck. I feel really stuck. I feel like I know these things, or I don't know these things, or I've just had this transition. I'm trying to figure out how I manage that. And sometimes having a third party who's more objective, who cares about you, but in a more objective way, can help provide insight on your situation. It's not about giving you advice. I'm not an advice giver.
Okay.
I'm there to support people and help them on their journey to get them where they want to go. So it's really self-driven from their perspective, which is the benefit. Does that answer that first question?
It does.
Okay. So the second one was
The right therapist.
about the right, yeah. There's so many factors in that. Sometimes the first thing that people want to think about or may be concerned about, especially if there's a trauma history, is the identified gender of the therapist.
Okay.
So if they have suffered some sort of sexual assault or sexual abuse at the hand of a specific gender, sometimes people will say, well, I don't really want to see, a male therapist, or I don't really want to see a female therapist. And so sometimes that can just naturally guide. Women tend to be perceived as like more compassionate and understanding and caring. So a lot of times people just gravitate towards that gender anyway, which is of course fine, but it's again about knowing what you're comfortable with. But it's also the style of the therapist too. So what I hear a lot is therapists don't call me back, and they just sat there and nodded, or I don't really know what we were doing, or there was some sort of inappropriate conduct on the part of the therapist towards the client. So it's really about knowing what you want in therapy, and if that fit doesn't feel right, if you're reading information about them, or you have an initial phone consultation and it just doesn't feel right, again, follow that gut instinct. So I encourage people to talk with a therapist before they schedule with them. Like, I offer a free 15-minute consultation for anyone who is considering therapy, because we want to both feel like it's a good fit for us.
Okay.
Because, just like friendships or employee relationships or whatever, you have to feel like that's a good fit. And research says that it actually doesn't matter the education or the theoretical approach or the techniques used in therapy. What causes change is the relationship the person has with the therapist. So that will be the foundation of what makes the work effective. And if it feels off, it's not going to be as effective. And that's why I always ask people for feedback. How's this going? What do you feel like we need to change? What do we need to do? And I even, with people, which is pretty unique in private practice, will create literally a treatment plan with them together. So what are the goals that you have?
Mm-hmm.
And I tell them, I want to make sure that we both know where we're starting, so that we feel like we can both be on the same track. But also, more realistically, I want to make myself accountable to the person. They're paying money to see me, or their insurance is paying money, and I want them to leave with tools that they can use at home. I want to work myself out of a job.
Okay, that was going to be my next step, is
Okay.
Working people, that you're not having a therapist for like 20 years.
Sure. I mean, some people do. If you have like a chronic, long-standing issue, sometimes like addiction or something, sometimes people want to have that continued support. There's certainly nothing wrong with that.
Okay.
But that therapy doesn't have to last forever.
Okay.
It is what you want it to be. But I would also say, make sure that you find a therapist that's comfortable having an open dialogue with you about that. How long do you want to be in therapy? How will you know that it's effective? How will you know when you're good enough?
Mm-hmm.
Because we could continue to work on improving ourselves in the context of therapy office forever.
Okay.
But do you need that? Do you want that? Or some other questions to think about.
Gotcha. And I know we're going to get ready to wrap up, but I guess one of the last things is, I know people kind of looked at cost or insurances.
Mm-hmm.
For people who don't have the financial means, or who do not have the insurance, what are some options or some suggestions that you may have for them?
Sure. So there are a lot of suggestions. I can't speak for everyone, because every therapist has their own policies about that. Every therapist usually has their own rates. But a good place to connect with is either Griffin Place, so you can call, they changed their number now, it's not 211 anymore. But they have a 24-hour informational hotline, so you can share your situation and ask about that. Contacting Community Mental Health, who also supports people who have Medicaid, can
Okay.
refer. Family and Children's Services offer services on a sliding fee scale, and they have great therapists there. But really, I mean, there are so many different circumstances for each individual therapist. So if you are doing research, and a lot of people find information about therapists online nowadays, if you're doing research and you're searching for someone and you find someone who will probably be a good fit, still reach out to them, because you never know. They may have a certain amount of slots of pro bono work that they do, or sliding fee scale. And what I always do, even if I'm not the right fit for a client, whether insurance or the issue that they're presenting, I'll create a warm transfer. So I'll say, you know what, I can't do this